I always thought coming home for Christmas meant returning to a place of comfort. But as I stood on my own front porch, my key wouldn't slide into the deadbolt. The familiar brass fixture was gone, replaced by a sleek, black digital keypad. I stepped back, brushing snow off my coat, and looked at the front windows. The heavy velvet drapes I had sewn 10 years ago were missing. In their place hung sheer, modern blinds. I hadn't been gone that long. 3 months in Florida helping my sister recover from knee surgery. Before I left, my son, David, and his wife, Sarah, asked if they could stay at my house for a few weeks while their apartment lease transitioned. I agreed. It made sense at the time. I pressed the doorbell. After a minute, the door swung open. Sarah stood there in a cashmere sweater, holding a mug of coffee. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before her face smoothed into a practiced, welcoming smile. "Catherine, we didn't expect you until the weekend," she chirped, stepping aside to let me in. I stepped into the foyer and stopped. The entire first floor had been repainted a sterile, icy gray. My antique console table was gone. The floral rug I bought in Charleston was replaced by bare, glossy hardwood. "Surprise," I replied, my voice steady. I took off my gloves, placing them on a new, minimalist glass table that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. The physical therapy finished early. David walked out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He froze when he saw me. "Mom. Wow. You're early." "I am." I picked up my suitcase. "I'll just take this up to my room and wash up." Sarah stepped in front of the stairs. She offered a tight, apologetic grimace. "Actually, Catherine, about that. We moved into the master bedroom. It just made more sense with my remote work setup. We put your things in the guest room down the hall. It's very cozy." I looked at David. He looked down at the floorboards. They hadn't asked. They hadn't discussed it. They had simply packed up my life and moved me into the smallest room in my own home. "I see," I murmured. I didn't drop my bag. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked past them and headed up the stairs, knowing exactly what I needed to check first. The guest room felt like a storage closet that someone had hurriedly disguised as a bedroom. Boxes of my personal belongings were stacked haphazardly in the corner. My clothes were crammed into a narrow wardrobe, many of them wrinkled. The bed was made with cheap, scratchy sheets that I didn't recognize. I sat on the edge of the mattress, listening to the muffled voices coming from the living room downstairs. "She wasn't supposed to be here until Sunday," Sarah hissed. "She's my mom, Sarah. We can't just tell her to leave," David whispered back, his voice lacking any real conviction. "We've practically renovated the whole place. We have people coming over for Christmas Eve. We need the space." I stood up and quietly unpacked my small suitcase. I didn't cry. Tears are a biological response to sudden pain. But what I felt wasn't pain. It was a cold, sharp clarity. For years, I had quietly subsidized David's life. I paid his college tuition, helped with his first car, and when he married Sarah, I gave them a generous check for their wedding. I thought I was being a supportive mother. Now, I saw clearly that I had simply trained them to view my resources as their own. I walked down to the kitchen. Sarah was reorganizing the refrigerator, moving my favorite brand of jam to the back to make room for a massive charcuterie platter. "Catherine," Sarah began, not looking up. "Since you're here early, do you mind keeping out of the main areas tomorrow afternoon? We're hosting a holiday mixer for my firm. I can bring a plate up to your room." David stood by the sink, completely silent. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "A mixer," I repeated calmly. Yes, it's very important for my promotion. Sarah closed the fridge. And honestly, the kitchen is going to be chaotic. We just need everything to look perfect. I poured myself a glass of water, taking my time. Of course, I nodded. I wouldn't want to get in the way. I walked back upstairs. If they wanted to play house, I would let them. But they had fundamentally misunderstood who actually owned the playground. I woke up at 5 a.m. the next morning. The house was dead quiet. I slipped out of the tiny guest bed, put on my robe, and walked down to the basement. When I left for Florida, I had given David access to a joint checking account. It held about $10,000. The agreement was simple. He would use it to pay my property taxes, the utility bills, and any minor maintenance issues that popped up while I was gone. My heavy, fireproof safe sat untouched behind a row of winter coats in the basement closet. They hadn't found it, or they hadn't bothered to look. I spun the combination lock, pulled the heavy door open, and retrieved my financial ledger and a spare laptop I kept for emergencies. Sitting at the small basement workbench, I logged into my bank. The joint account balance read $14.50. I clicked on the transaction history. The property taxes had not been paid. Instead, there were charges for a custom painting service, a high-end furniture store, and a local contractor. A $4,000 charge to a place called Coastal Storage Solutions caught my eye. They had used my money to erase me from my own house. I closed the laptop. My heartbeat was steady. I didn't storm upstairs. I didn't wake them up to demand answers. Arguing with entitled people only gives them a stage to play the victim. You don't negotiate with someone who is comfortable stealing from you. You simply remove their access. I opened a new tab and checked the property records on the county website. The deed was still fully, securely in my name. Catherine Miller, sole owner. I carefully packed the laptop and the physical deed into my tote bag. I locked the safe, turned off the basement light, and walked back upstairs. The smell of expensive coffee began to drift from the kitchen. Sarah was awake, preparing for her party. The game was clear now. They were betting I would choose family peace over personal boundaries. It was a bad bet. After breakfast, I put on my coat and picked up my car keys. "Going out?" David asked. He was arranging decorative pine cones on the dining table. "Just running some errands." I smiled mildly. I drove straight to Coastal Storage Solutions. The manager at the front desk looked up as I approached. I handed him my driver's license. "I need to check on a unit," I stated. "I believe it was rented recently under David Miller, but the payment came from my account." The manager tapped on his keyboard. "Ah, yes, Unit 412. It's in his name, ma'am. I can't give you the gate code unless you're on the authorized list." "Understood. Can you tell me if the account is set to auto-pay from a card ending in 4492? He checked. "Yes, it is. I am the owner of that card." I slid my bank card across the counter. "I need you to remove this card from the file immediately. It is no longer authorized for this account." The manager frowned, but processed the request. "He'll be locked out next week if he doesn't provide a new payment method." "That sounds like a problem for David," I replied evenly. Before leaving, I walked around the perimeter fence and located Unit 412. Through the slightly bent metal grate at the top, I could see my life boxed away. My heavy oak dining chairs, the paintings my late husband had bought, the grandfather clock. They hadn't sold them. They had just banished them. I drove to my local bank branch next. I sat down with a personal banker named Thomas, who had known me for a decade. "Thomas, I need to close the joint checking account I share with my son." Right now. Of course. Catherine, there's only a few dollars left in it. Should I transfer it to your main account? Yes. And please ensure my main checking and savings accounts are completely locked down. No authorized users, no secondary cards, just me. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter. The financial tap was officially shut off. David and Sarah were about to discover how expensive it was to live their lifestyle on their own dime. I returned to the house around 3 in the afternoon. The driveway was packed with luxury SUVs. Sarah's holiday mixer was in full swing. Soft jazz played from the new speakers they had installed in the ceiling. I walked in quietly through the garage. The kitchen was a disaster zone of dirty plates, empty wine bottles, and half-eaten appetizers. Sarah stood near the island, chatting with two women in sharp business suits. She caught my eye and immediately excused herself, hurrying over to me. Catherine, hi. She kept her voice low, her smile bright and fake. Listen, the caterers were a bit short-staffed. Do you mind just tossing those plates in the dishwasher? It would be a huge help. She was treating me like the hired help in my own kitchen. I looked at the mountain of dishes. Then I looked at Sarah. No, I replied calmly. Her fake smile faltered. Excuse me. I don't mind a lot of things, Sarah, but I am not washing your dishes. I kept my tone conversational, pleasant even. Enjoy your party. I walked past her, retrieved my coat from the hallway closet, and walked out the front door. I drove to a quiet diner a few towns over, ordered a slice of cherry pie, and read a book for 3 hours. My phone buzzed around 6 p.m. A text from David. Mom. My debit card declined at the liquor store. Did you do something to the account? We need more wine for Sarah's boss. I read the message, took a sip of my coffee, and put the phone back in my purse without replying. When I finally returned home at 8 o'clock, the party was winding down. The house was quiet. I walked up to the front door and typed in the code David had given me on the first day, 1984. Beep. Red light. I tried again. 1984. Beep. Red light. I stood in the freezing cold. They had changed the code, whether out of petty anger over the dishes or the declined card. They had intentionally locked me out. I didn't knock. I didn't ring the bell. I simply stepped off the porch and walked around to the side of the house, pushing through the overgrown azalea bushes. When my husband and I bought this house 30 years ago, he installed a heavy-duty deadbolt on the side garage door. When David upgraded the front lock to a digital keypad, he hadn't bothered to change the manual side door. He probably didn't even know where the spare key was. I reached up into the hollow space behind the outdoor light fixture, my fingers brushing against the cold, familiar metal. The key turned smoothly in the lock. I stepped into the dark garage and quietly entered the house. David and Sarah were in the living room, watching television. She can sleep in her car if she wants to be petty, Sarah was saying, her voice tight with irritation. That account was supposed to be for house expenses. It was her money. Sarah. David muttered weakly. It's our house now. She basically gave it to us when she left. I stood in the shadows of the hallway for a moment, absorbing the sheer delusion in her voice. They truly believed they had conquered this space. I quietly walked upstairs to the cramped guest room. I pulled my suitcase from under the bed and began packing. I didn't pack everything, just my essentials, my important documents, and my jewelry. This house no longer felt like mine. It felt contaminated by their entitlement. But I wasn't going to fight them for the physical space tonight. I was going to let them have it, temporarily, under entirely new terms. I zipped my bag, put on a fresh coat, and walked down the stairs. I didn't sneak. My footsteps were deliberate. David turned around as I reached the bottom step. He saw the suitcase. Panic flashed in his eyes. "Mom, what are you doing? How did you get in?" "I used my key." "David." I adjusted the strap of my bag. "I'm leaving." Sarah stood up, crossing her arms. "Oh, please, don't be dramatic. We just changed the code for security because of the party. You could have knocked." I looked directly at her. "I don't knock on my own front door." I opened the door and walked out into the winter night. I spent that night at a comfortable hotel by the interstate. The next morning, Christmas Eve, I drove into town and met with Martha, an old friend who ran a local property management company. Martha poured me a cup of tea in her office. She listened quietly as I explained the situation, the unauthorized renovations, the drained bank account, the changed locks. "You want to evict them?" Martha asked, pulling out a notepad. "No." I took a sip of the hot tea. Evictions take time. They cause ugly, drawn-out fights. They thrive on drama. "Martha, I am going to remove the ground they are standing on." "What's the plan?" "I want to sell the house. Immediately. As is." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Catherine, you've lived there for 30 years. And the memories are mine to keep. But the building itself has become a weapon they are using against me. I won't allow it." "It's a seller's market, isn't it?" "Very much so." She nodded. "Inventory is incredibly low right now. If we listed aggressively, we could have cash offers by the end of the week." "Do it. I have the deed right here." I pulled the folder from my bag. "I want the listing live by tomorrow morning. Put a sign in the yard at dawn." "They are going to lose their minds," Martha noted, entirely unfazed. "That is their prerogative." Before I left, Martha helped me secure a 6-month lease on a beautiful, light-filled condo overlooking the river on the other side of town. It was fully furnished, quiet, and required a security fob for entry. I spent Christmas Eve moving my suitcases into the new condo. I bought a small tabletop pine tree, a good bottle of red wine, and a roasted chicken from the deli. I sat on my new balcony, watching the snow fall over the river. I was alone, but for the first time since returning from Florida, I breathed deeply. I was in total control. At 6:30 a.m. on Christmas morning, while the sky was still a dark, bruising purple, Martha's team arrived at my property. I wasn't there, but Martha texted me the updates. They quietly hammered the heavy wooden "for sale" post into the frozen front lawn, right next to the walkway. They attached the sleek, red and white sign. They didn't knock on the door. They didn't disturb the occupants. They simply marked the territory. I woke up at 8 o'clock in my new condo, made a cup of black coffee, and sat down at the kitchen island. I picked up my phone. The screen was flooded. I had 14 missed calls from David. I had 22 missed calls from Sarah. There were dozens of text messages, growing increasingly frantic. "Mom, what is this sign in the yard?" "Mom, call me back right now, Catherine. This isn't funny. Tell your real estate friend to remove this immediately. Mom, people are slowing down in their cars to look at the house. Stop this." I didn't reply. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Around 9:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. I tapped the screen and held it to my ear. It was David. and he sounded completely unhinged. "Mom, pick up the phone." Sarah went outside to pull the sign out of the ground, and Mrs. Gable next door started yelling at us about destroying property. And now Sarah is screaming at her. Mrs. Gable called the cops for a noise complaint. "The police are here." "Mom, they're parked in the driveway asking for our IDs. Call me back." I lowered the phone. I hadn't called the authorities. I hadn't set a legal trap. I had simply exercised my right to sell my own asset, and their entitlement had caused them to self-destruct on the front lawn. I deleted the voicemail. By noon, the police had left my old house. They had simply told David and Sarah to keep the noise down and stop ripping up professionally installed real estate signs. It wasn't a police matter. It was a neighborhood disturbance. At 1 p.m., Martha texted me. First showing scheduled for 3 p.m. Cash buyer. I finally sent a singleton group text to David and Sarah. The house is on the market. The first showing is at 3 p.m. today. Please ensure the property is tidy. The real estate agent has the master key. I suggest you begin looking for a new apartment. Catherine. My phone rang immediately. I answered. "Are you insane?" Sarah shrieked through the speaker. "You can't sell this house. We just spent $4,000 painting it and buying furniture." "You spent $4,000 of my money." "Sarah," I corrected mildly. "You drained my tax account." "We are living here," David yelled in the background. "You can't just kick us out on Christmas." "I am not kicking you out," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I am selling my property. The new owners will likely give you a standard 30-day notice to vacate once closing is complete. You have plenty of time to pack. You already boxed up all my things, so you should have plenty of practice." "We will not let anyone inside this house," Sarah threatened. "Martha is bringing the prospective buyers," I said calmly. "If you refuse entry to my authorized agent, the next step will be formal eviction for squatting. That will go on your public record. It makes renting a nice apartment in the future very difficult. I leave the choice to you." I hung up. At 3:15 p.m., Martha texted me a photo. It was the prospective buyers walking through the kitchen. In the background, David and Sarah were sitting stiffly on the sofa, looking terrified and entirely powerless. The house sold in 4 days. A retired couple moving from Chicago offered cash, 5% over the asking price. They loved the modern gray walls and the empty, minimalist feel David and Sarah had so carefully curated. I met David at a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon to hand over some final mail. He looked exhausted. He hadn't shaved, and the arrogant posture he carried just a week ago was completely gone. "We found an apartment," he mumbled, staring into his coffee cup. "It's small. It's out in the suburbs. We have to pay for the storage unit now, too, for all the furniture we bought." "I see," I said. "You really didn't have to do this. Mom, we're family. Family respects boundaries. David, family doesn't steal money. Take over a home and lock the owner out." I slid the stack of envelopes across the table. "I have paid my own storage unit fees for my antique furniture. The rest of the accounts are separated." "Sarah is furious," he warned quietly. "She says she's never speaking to you again?" "That is a consequence I am fully prepared to live with." I smiled politely. I stood up, buttoned my coat, and walked out of the coffee shop. I didn't feel a dramatic sense of triumph, just a quiet, profound relief. I drove back to my new condo by the river. The money from the house sale cleared a month later. I invested the bulk of it quietly and securely. My new space was smaller, but it was filled only with things I loved. and people I invited. There were no more surprise guests. There was no more financial bleed. When the sun set over the water, painting the living room in warm, golden light, I locked my front door with my own key. The silence in the room wasn't lonely. It was the sound of absolute peace.